Hey everybody, welcome to the Tracy Williams Show. We have a fantastic show for you tonight. We are at the Sam Houston Regional Library and Research Center here in Liberty, Texas. And I'm just amazed that we have such a great facility here right in Liberty that you can see. Now you can't see it right now because of the COVID thing, and that's why I'm bringing you the behind the scenes. So today I have Alana Inman, and she's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then she's going to do a tour. Right now we have to wear the mask. We are in a government...
Right, we're masks required at the moment inside the building if you come to visit us for research. But once we step apart, we'll slip them off so you can hear me for sure.
Right, and then we'll be far enough away and we won't get close without the mask on. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been here at the Sam Houston Center for about 8 years at this point. Before that, I worked for the Missouri State Archives. The Sam Houston Center, for those of you who don't know, is part of the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. So we are part of a state government agency. So previously I worked for the equivalent in Missouri.
Okay.
But I am a native Southeast Texan. So what happened, my current boss, the director of our division, the Archives and Information Services division of TSLAC, we worked together in the Missouri State Archives. So when the Sam Houston Center needed a manager, she let me know that the position was open because she remembered that I'm from Newton. So I'm actually from one of the 10 counties that we serve. So, you know, it worked out really well. Luckily, I ended up getting the position, so I was able to kind of come back to my roots. My family is still in this area. And so, you know, in our job to be able to get to do the history of the local area that you're from, I mean, that's great. So it's just been a great opportunity. It means that sometimes, you know, when I'm here working with the records, I come across my own family. I mean, I came back from lunch one day, somebody had come across my mom's engagement photo in the Newton County News newspaper and, you know, had it waiting for me on my desk. So it's just been a real pleasure to come back home. In terms of my background, I work in this field. I have a master's degree in history and a master's degree in library science. So that's kind of been my path here and my path in the field.
Well, we are glad you're here.
Thank you.
You can also hear her once a month on the Party Line.
Yes, the first Thursday of the month we do the Party Line program for the center about different collections here or what we have going on, or, you know, focus in on different things in the museum. So certainly listen to that if you want to keep up with what's happening at the center.
Yes. Okay. Well, then we're going to dive right into our little tour of the museum.
Sounds perfect.
And it's been recently redone 2 years ago?
Yes. It opened in 2018. Now, there's always been a museum here at the facility. Mm-hmm. The Sam Houston Center has been opened since 1977. It has this main building that you're in right now, which has our research library, which is here behind me, where you can come in and do your own research. It has some historic buildings on the property that normally you'd be able to tour, and it's always had a museum. But it had not been renovated in quite a long time, so 2 years ago in 2018, we gave it a new facelift. I mean, everything from the floor to the ceiling, put in kind of all of the bells and whistles, interactives and the like that people enjoy when they come to museums these days. And redid it with a permanent exhibit telling the history of the area in Southeast Texas that we serve. So if we're ready to go, we'll kick it off.
Let's go.
Okay.
We'll follow you.
So the name of the permanent exhibit that you'll get to enjoy when you're in the museum, and as Tracy mentioned, it is closed at the moment during the pandemic merely because of those interactives. The governor has said that museums with interactives that everybody would be touching should remain closed. That's why we're giving you this teaser right now, so you can see a little bit of it when you can't physically come, and that will whet your appetite to come when you can. And the exhibit that you'll be seeing is Atascocito, the history of Southeast Texas. And so basically it's giving you a chronological storyline from 13,000 BC to the 20th century for our area of Southeast Texas. The Sam Houston Center is what is referred to as an RHRD, a Regional Historical Resource Depository for Texas. There are ones throughout the state for specific local areas that coordinate and are part of a program within TSLAC. We're the only one state-owned. What the RHRDs do is that's where local government records that a particular local government official doesn't have room for anymore, or other various reasons they may not want or need to keep them, but they still need to be kept for the people and for history, they go to the RHRD. So we are the designated RHRD for 10 counties in Southeast Texas. You can see them here: San Jacinto, Polk, Tyler, Jasper, Newton, obviously Liberty, Hardin, Orange, Jefferson, and Chambers. Now, the way they picked our 10 counties as an RHRD is all of these 10 counties were fully within the boundaries of the Atascocito district. And what I mean by Atascocito district is that was the governing district set up by Mexico when Texas was still part of Mexico. You can see in this lighter yellow outline here the approximate boundaries of that district and how over time most of that has become these 10 counties. So that's the 10 counties we serve. Now, we don't just bring in the local government records, although that's the primary purpose for which we were created. We also have maps, photographed, private papers, all kinds of things in the collection. Actually, 12,000 cubic feet to be precise. So to give you kind of an idea of what that means is if you took each page and each artifact and spread it out, we'd run for about 55 football fields. So in the museum, you're just going to see a taste of all the great things that we have for you to see and you to use when researching Southeast Texas, even national history, as we'll see in the museum, Southeast Texas has played a role in, but also for those of you who have ancestors that were in this area, your own family history. So let's proceed on into the museum.
Great.
So the first thing that you'll see when you visit is this document right here. This is the oldest document within the collection of the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. So not necessarily the oldest document ever that mentions Atascocito, although it could be, I don't know, but certainly the oldest within our own agency. This is actually from the collection in Austin, although most of what you see in here is from the Liberty collection. But this is a letter from 1808 in which someone from Louisiana was asking permission to settle in Atascocito, the Spanish settlement at the time. So we kind of kick off with the oldest mention we have of Atascocito, which actually began before it was kind of the name of the governing district as the second Spanish settlement in this area. But from there, we go ahead and bounce back to the prehistoric era, because before Spain came and claimed this area, there were native people already here. So 11,000 BC, 13,000 years ago, we know people were in this area, the Clovis people, because items have been found in our 10-county region related to the Clovis. Specifically in this case are several Clovis items, including a complete point. For those of you kind of familiar with Liberty geography, or those of you who've come to visit us, or when you come to visit us, you're going to cross a little bridge on the road that goes over Wood Springs. So this Clovis point, many of the pieces in this case, including this big mammoth tooth fragment, so this is a broken piece of a mammoth's tooth, all were found up at Wood Springs. So just kind of let that boggle your mind, that 13,000 years ago, these items were right up the road, and now they've found their way into an exhibit case, maybe what, half a mile away? Now, if you're wondering what you would try and take down with that little bitty point right there, let me introduce you to our Columbian mammoth. Approximately, but not quite as tall as he likely would have been. We affectionately call him Dub, after the volunteer from the Houston Archaeological Society that helped us identify all of these points. So with this little bitty point, I'd say maybe 2 inches at best, you're trying to take down Dub. So I don't know. I'm glad that I can go to the grocery store.
Right.
Also in this section, you can see plenty of other projectile points and stone artifacts, scrapers, some ornaments, some other teeth from different animals that go through the various periods of prehistory, and also they are color-coded by the counties. So if you're not from Liberty, maybe you're tuning in from Jasper County or my home county of Newton, you can come see some pieces that we've identified for you as being from your area. Now, of course, as most of us know, obviously, other people began to come into the area. So the next section that you'll step into is going to be items related to the Spanish era. Things like these crockery sherds and trade beads from El Orcacusac. Now, El Orcacusac was the first Spanish settlement. As you'll remember, I said Atascocita is actually the second. So this was about 1756 that Orcacusac was founded, and then we also have some items from Atascocito. Now, both of these at some point in time would have had some military personnel on site. While this cannonball was not necessarily at either one of those, it is a cannonball circa about 1700, so you can get an idea of what they would have been using out here to fortify the area. However, saying that, back then it was not quite like it is now if you were wanting to come into the USA or into Texas. There was nobody at a gate asking for your passport, so you had people coming over the border, for example, the French. Some exiles who had supported Napoleon after he had fallen actually came into the area surrounding Liberty about 1818, and for about 6 months they had a settlement here called Champ d'Asile, or Field of Refuge. Now, people debate why they were actually here, but they had things like military drills, but weren't really quite prepared to feed themselves, which is why they lasted about 6 months. So the prevailing theory is that General Lalemant and these Napoleonic exiles were here to try and start a settlement and end up making the Mexico independent and a new Napoleonic empire here in this area. But as I mentioned, they only made it about 6 months. Spain wasn't really happy about them being here when they found out. They headed to Galveston and kind of left the area. But this became a very romanticized thing in France. You know, these Napoleon supporters over here making this idyllic community, this field of refuge in East Texas. It made it onto wallpaper, liquor bottles, books were written about it, and you had art made depicting Champ d'Asile, many with mountains and palm trees. Now, I don't know if you've seen any mountains or palm trees in Liberty lately, but they really built it up. The French were not the only group that came in. There were other groups coming into the area, and specifically I'm thinking of the Alabama and Coushatta tribes. Most everyone is familiar with the Alabama Coushatta Reservation. At the time that they first came here in the Spanish era, and they were welcomed here, they were two separate tribes, the Alabama and the Coushatta. So we have a case of items made by the Alabama Coushatta tribe. Most of these are modern pieces, but made in the same style as they would have been before, because the tribe is maintaining their original art forms and native techniques. But I believe we all know we are not part of Spain today, so something must have happened. The first thing that happened is Mexico gained its independence in 1821, so this area became part of Mexico. This would be the time in which you see a lot more Anglo immigration happening. In fact, in 1825, Mexico officially opened up to settlers from America. Now, that isn't to say they weren't already here, but officially opened up in 1825. So that's when a lot of the family names that local people are accustomed to or whatnot, they start coming in kind of right before Mexican independence or thereafter around 1825. It's also, as I've mentioned, under Mexico that the district was organized as the Atascocito district, but eventually the settlers voted on where they would like the seat of government to be. This is when you have liberty created. Technically, Libertad, Villa de, long name that I don't have a good enough Spanish to tell you off the top of my head or pronounce correctly. But Libertad was created as the city, and then also it became the Libertad District, Liberty as we know it today. And that was in 1831. So a couple things you can see related to that are original letters that other Mexican townships sent congratulating Liberty on becoming the seat of government for the area. Now, we also all know we're not part of Mexico today. So what happened next was the Texas Revolution in 1836. And we have a lot of items in our collection related to the Texas Revolution. In particular, the Anahuac disturbances. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Anahuac disturbances, before the revolution even began in 1836, there were some tension and some flare-ups between settlers in Anahuac and the Mexican government in 1832 and in 1835. One which ended with the settlers writing the Turtle Bayou resolutions, explaining why they had done what they did, and everyone signing their names to it. And so you have here the page from the actual Turtle Bayou resolutions where they defended their position and signed their names. You also have a muster roll from Captain William N. Logan's company of the Revolutionary War soldiers. You also have some items. A lot of people don't realize that some of the Mexican prisoners from the Battle of San Jacinto ultimately ended up here in Liberty and being housed here in Liberty. So we have some items related to that, including an image of Aunt Harriet, a slave of William Hardin and the Hardin family, who primarily took care of the prisoners, and also a brick that the prisoners purportedly built. That was one of the things that they were doing while housed here. In case anyone missed this part of their Texas history class, Texas did win the Texas Revolution and become the Republic of Texas. We have many original documents from that period, but none that really captures everyone's attention, kind of like this one. This is the private executive record of Sam Houston in his second term as President of the Republic. So if you ever wondered what Sam Houston's signature looked like, here you go. So obviously back in the day, you didn't have photocopiers, you didn't have scanners, so you would write down your correspondence and things that you had sent so you could remember what you said. And a little behind the scenes anecdote on this artifact: when we were setting up the museum and we first put it in the case, we just opened it to any page. You know, Sam Houston's signature is cool on every page. And it happened to fall open to where he had written a letter, and I am paraphrasing Sam Houston, but saying that he had told everyone they needed to save the government records for history, and if they didn't, they basically were stupid, and he had told them so. So I was kind of like, imagine that. We fall open to the page where he is defending archives and museums. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate the support. So while we were the Republic of Texas, that is when you see slavery become more of an institution in this area. That is not to say that slaves were not already here, but most Mexicans and the Mexican government opposed slavery. So you have Americans coming in where that was an institution. You have the Republic of Texas that's no longer the Mexican government, and so you do see slavery become much more prevalent in our area. Now, a lot of people think, nah, we're not Georgia or South Carolina where there were these huge cotton plantations that you see in the movies, but in actuality, 1 in 3 households in Southeast Texas would have had a slave. There was some cotton in this area, but there were other crops as well, and many slaves helped with the cattle industry, and other livestock. So Southeast Texas did have slavery, and we have many things in our collection that demonstrate that and demonstrate the impact that that had on lives. For example, this is one of many bills of sale that we have where slaves were being sold in our area, and this happens to be for an 11-year-old boy named Jack. Now, you can't tell from the bill of sale where his family was or what happened to his family, but usually in this type of situation where it's a child being sold by themselves, you know that they have been removed from their family. We also have a revolver that was used by Levi Martin when he was a slave in this area tending cattle. This was what he used when tending cattle. And then you would step over into steamboat traffic. So transportation, early transportation in this area, and what was being used for a lot of the commerce at the time would have been steamboats. So we have a steamboat anchor from the Cleona. If you've ever wanted to take a selfie with a steamboat anchor, now's your chance. And then we have several other items from shipwrecks, basically, where some of the steamboats sank on the Trinity River, or different receipts for goods, the log book from the Mary Conley, one of the steamboats on the river. So a lot of things you can check out related to the steamboat traffic. But that main industry for this area early on would have been the cattle industry. Now, cattle, of course, is very associated with Texas, but you picture it, West Texas, lots of dust. They're carrying them to Oklahoma. Cattle industry was very prevalent here as well, but they were taking them on trails to Louisiana. So we have a lot of things in our collection that show you different cattle drives over to Louisiana, the brands of the cattle being taken, different marks and brands books from all of the different counties. You had to register your brand or your earmark for hogs and other livestock to prove your ownership. So you can go back and see what your family's brand or earmark would have been. We also, a lot of people don't realize, have a pretty substantial saddle collection. I'd say we probably have 10 to 15 saddles in the collection that we rotate out through the museum for you to see. Now, all of this, the Republic of Texas, then of course we become a state. All of this early industry would have been around the time of or right before the Civil War. The Civil War, of course, having an impact in this area as it did everywhere. And we have a lot of things related to the Civil War, primarily because of the Gillard Duncan family. For those of you who have visited the center before, you've actually seen the Gillard Duncan house, the 1848 plantation house that's here on the property now. Well, the Duncan in Gillard Duncan house comes from Captain William Duncan, who was a captain in Spates Battalion in the Civil War. And the family kept all of the family's papers, including his, many of which relate to the Civil War, and donated them to the center. So, for example, he acquired a mail bag and some candles from one of the Union gunboats from the Battle of Sabine Pass, the one Civil War battle that was in this area in Jefferson County. So you can see those here. These are pictures of William Duncan and his wife Selma. He was married to Selma Duncan during the Civil War, and you can see their correspondence. This is just a few letters from a large amount of correspondence we have for the couple, but you can see one of the ones in here that really shows you just kind of the human aspect of war and what people were going through, where he's writing her that he knows that if there is an attack in this area, that she will be brave. We also have a letter where someone wrote to William Duncan. It's not on display at the moment, but they had heard their husband had been killed and wanted him to write back and let them know whether or not their husband was still alive. So those are some of the Civil War items that you can see. And then after the Civil War, about 1866, we start to call that kind of the modern era. So this section is Reconstruction through the 20th century. So as most everybody recognizes, because there's still major industries for our area, this is where you get into timber, rice, and oil. So we have a lot of things related to the timber industry. One thing that a lot of people do not realize is back in the day there weren't trains and big diesel trucks to move your logs after you would cut them down. They would have to send them down the rivers. There would actually be men who rode the logs, getting them down the river. Well, when it gets to the other side, how do you tell whose log's who at that point? Well, they would brand logs just like you would brand cattle. Now, rather than burning it into a hide the way you would with cattle, they had what you could think of as a big hammer with the brand on the end that they would slam against the log and indent a brand into the log. So just like we have marks and brands records for livestock, we have log brand books where you can see what the brand was for a particular person who was involved in the timber industry. As far as rice, something that many people don't realize about the rice industry is that there were a lot of immigrants who came to this area for the rice industry. Japanese and Dutch primarily coming into the Orange County, Jefferson County area. And we have a lot of their naturalization papers because at that time you didn't necessarily have to go through the federal government to become an American. So we have a lot of the naturalization papers for the immigrants coming in to work the rice industry, along with a lot of imagery and different items from the rice industry. Likewise, we have much related to the oil industry, both Spindletop that we've all heard of, but also the Sour Lake oil field, including maps showing where different oil deposits were, images, and even, as you can see here, just different things that would be souvenirs from places, or just like now, you may be given a pin or a squeeze ball from a particular business. You know, here's a paperweight from one of the sulfur companies. But in the modern era, it wasn't just all about industry and economic and business history. There was a lot of social history happening, civil rights, women's rights. We have things in our collection related to that. A lot of time people think, you know, local government records can't tell you very much. But actually, government records can tell you a lot. I mean, something as simple as a voter registration receipt, for example, like whatever, people registered to vote. But what it can show you is that women got the right to vote in Texas in 1918. So actually before the 19th Amendment was ratified federally, women in Texas could vote in primary elections in the state. And you can tell, this happens to be registration receipts from Newton County, that this was a big deal to these women. This wasn't a situation like we often have today of like, well, my vote's not going to count. Oh, I was busy and I didn't make it up there. You can see the next day, that same week, once they could register, they turned out page after page of women registering to vote. We also have items related to civil rights, related to the discrimination that was in this area, as it was many places. And then we have information related to the freedom colonies that former slaves founded, what they had to go through to form labor unions when they weren't allowed to unionize, to try and get themselves rights in their jobs. The schools they had to found, everything they had to go through, the challenges to be educated and get the rights that they deserved. So you can learn all about that here in the exhibit as well. And then, of course, there are some other big national stories in the modern era that had their impact on Southeast Texas as well. World War I, World War II, and the Great Depression. So you can see some of the items in our collection related to that. For example, on display right now is a poster created for Sergeant James Young of Hardin that was killed in action, his memorial poster, and then also the actual telegram that his family was sent notifying them of his death. Also, you have the opportunity to listen to an interview with someone discussing a prisoner of war trying to escape in Dayton when they were there working on cutting down some trees. A lot of people don't realize that there were prisoner of war camps in this area, 6 agricultural camps to be exact. Now, when you just, Google POW camps in Texas, you're going to see, the big ones, the main ones, not these satellite camps, that were associated with a certain military installation. But many of the POWs were sent to communities where there were these agricultural camps, and they would help with things like the rice industry, the timber industry, and whatnot. And there were 6 in this area, including 1 in Liberty. So you can learn more about that. And then the permanent exhibit concludes here in the Continuing the Legacy section. You could think of this almost like a Southeast Texas Hall of Fame. What this demonstrates to you is the impact that our area, that Southeast Texans have made and continue to make on the world. Not just our politicians or our entertainers and celebrities, although obviously they're here, the athletes and whatnot, but we have people from this area that have won Nobel Prizes, made massive scientific discoveries. So you can see some of them here in the gallery, and then you also have a chance here at the end to share your story. Tell us about the person that you think has made a difference in Southeast Texas, in the state, in the world, that came from our area, so that we can add them as one of Southeast Texas' legacies. So that concludes the permanent exhibit, basically, when you visit us. But you will also see when you are here whatever special exhibit that we happen to have on display. We reserved a small space in the museum for rotating exhibits so that we'd be able to dial down in more detail on some of these topics or cover some topics that we weren't able to get to in the main exhibit. So, for example, right now the exhibit that's on display is Wish You Were Here. So this focuses on travel and tourism in our area historically, divided into the Piney Woods and the Gulf Coast. So just some things you can see are things related to the Alabama Coushatta Reservation, things related to Sour Lake before it was known for its oil industry, when it was actually known for the springs that ended up being the geological phenomenon that would bring you the oil industry and the sulfur, but before were considered a health resort to go to the springs. Sam Houston himself went. So you can see some images from the Sour Lake Hotel when it was known as a health resort instead of an oil mecca. Also items related to the Big Thicket. A lot of people don't realize that before the Great Depression, back in the 30s, there was a group organized to save the Big Thicket. Now, when you had the Great Depression and the World War, obviously those efforts fell away, and it picked back up in the 60s and actually became the Big Thicket, the National Preserve that we know it as today. But you can see here in the exhibit some of the items, including an original membership card from that first group trying to save the Big Thicket for our area. You can see tourism booklets promoting, moving to and coming to the different areas, including one for Liberty from 1914. And a lot of different postcards and images from the Gulf Coast area. Many of them, of course, related to water recreation in the area, pleasure pier, fishing, including this map that is supposed to tell you where the fish are at. So our fishermen, they are probably still there. You may want to come check this out. So basically that is the museum here at the Sam Houston Center. So I certainly hope you've enjoyed your virtual tour while you can't come visit us in person, and I hope it's given you a taste of what you can enjoy here at the center. And once we are open again, you'll come to check it out. Keep coming to check it out to see the special exhibits, but also the new items for the permanent exhibit. For preservation reasons, these things can't stay out forever. The light will damage them and whatnot. So while the story stays the same, the items don't. So keep coming to see the new cool things, or just come into the reading room and ask to see some of the cool things. We are currently open for research appointments right now. So you can just give us a call, schedule your appointment to come out and do research, 936-336-8821, or send us an email at samhoustoncenter@tsl.texas.gov, or just Google Sam Houston Regional Library and Research Center, and you'll find your way to us. So is there anything else I can do for you, Tracy, or any questions or anything?
I just think it's fantastic. I mean,
thank you.
I just want to say, I'm still social distancing here. That's why you're not seeing me on camera. But when I came through here after they redid it in 2018, my kids were like, come on, Mom, come on, Mom. I mean, you get stuck at every little exhibit in here because it's so interesting. There's a lot to read, a lot of information that you have no idea about.
Right.
So I really appreciate you bringing us behind the scenes and seeing everything. And I want to say to the viewers, if you have a history topic that you want to know about, drop it in the comments and we'll try to find somebody anywhere. I don't know. I'll try anywhere to find somebody to answer our questions.
And we can help you with that. Those of you who listen to Party Line, you know, y'all will know that sometimes I get asked questions. People may call in or whatever. I wish I was that great a font of knowledge and I could answer every single possible history question, you know, for 10 counties from the beginning of time. But alas, I am not that person. But we always try and find the answers for you if I don't just know them off the top of my head or other, you know, staff members don't. So definitely comment. We'll try and get your answers for you or get you connected with the right person. You know, don't forget when you visit our website, you'll be on our webpage, but that is connected. Obviously, it's part of the entire Texas State Library and Archives Commission website. So there's the Texas Digital Archive that you'll find on that website, which has some of our collections digitized, like Jean Lafitte's, purportedly, the pirate Jean Lafitte's diary, the Don Kelly postcard collection, a lot of cool things from our collection that you can just go see online right now while you can't visit us, but also just scores of collections for Texas as a whole that TSLAC has put up, and a lot of finding aids and information about the information that you can get through the repository, you know, in Austin if we don't have what you're looking for here. So you'll definitely want to check that out. And you made me think of it. Also, we have an online activity book. When your kids come, we have an online activity. Well, we have an activity book. Obviously, if you're here, you don't need the online one. But we have an activity book that they can use to go through the museum and find different answers with coloring pages and whatnot. Since you can't necessarily get into the museum right now, we have put that up online. So you may want to go to our webpage and check that out because there'd be some different games and coloring pages and things that your kids could do right now since you can't come see us at the moment.
Well, we really appreciate it, Alana. This has been a fantastic program.
Thank
I can't
you.
believe you just did all that on the fly. That was awesome.
Well, I've done it a few times.
Okay, well, thank you, and we will see you next week at 6. Right now, I think next week we'll have behind the scenes with First Liberty National Bank. So we'll see. Okay, see you guys later. Bye-bye.